All right, let's dive into the single most important event in modern history. We're talking about a conflict that didn't just change borders. It forged entire empires, created absolute legends, and buried a secret that, honestly, still haunts the world today. This is the story of the 50-Year War.
You know what's funny? You can't really get a grip on what's happening right now, the politics, the alliances, the whole power dynamic, without looking back. Because almost all of it connects to this one, single, world-shattering war that ended only about 30 years ago. So let's put this on a timeline. The war kicked off in the year 941 and just kept going all the way to 992. That's more than half a century of non-stop conflict, an entire era completely reshaped by this one catastrophic event.
51 years. Just let that number sink in. 51 years. Entire generations were born into that war, they lived their whole lives in it, and they died in it. It was the only reality they ever knew. So let's take a look at how that crucible really forged the world we see today.
Now here's the wild paradox of it all. Out of all that horror and bloodshed, the great kingdoms actually forged the identities they're known for today. It was, for lack of a better term, their trial by fire.
Take the Kingdom of Breeze. They looked at the chaos on land and said, nope. They turned to the oceans. The sea became their fortress and their highway, and they got so good at it that they built the largest, most powerful navy in the world, a real symbol of their strength.
At the same time, the Hightower kingdoms, they went a different route. They looked inward, focusing their energy on the arcane arts. But they weren't trying to create superweapons. No, their goal was survival. They perfected these incredibly powerful protective spells, basically turning their cities into magical fortresses to ride out the storm.
And then, of course, you have the Crystal Kingdom. They leaned into what they did best, combat. They mastered their martial skills and learned how to channel the immense power of their sacred crystal right into their weapons. Their warriors became absolute legends on the battlefield for a reason.
Okay, so that's the official story, right? 3 powerful kingdoms duking it out for supremacy. But this is where the history books get a little fuzzy. That story isn't exactly wrong, but it is missing a huge piece of the puzzle. Because you have to ask yourself a simple question. When there's that much destruction for that long, who's really winning? The answer isn't one of the kingdoms. It points to a shadowy group that nobody even knew was there. And here they are, the Dark Lotus. This wasn't some rival nation. It was a secret underground syndicate. And the craziest part? They secretly planned and orchestrated the entire 51-year war, all for their own benefit.
The level of control they had is just mind-blowing. The Dark Lotus had their hands in everything. They had spies in the markets, agents in the armies, and, get this, they even infiltrated the high councils of all 3 kingdoms. They were the puppet masters of the entire world for decades, and nobody had a clue.
So, how in the world do you even begin to uncover a conspiracy that deep? Well, it wasn't a king, or a general, or some high council that figured it out. It was a small, unassuming group of adventurers who just happened to stumble upon a secret that would change everything.
Yeah, they were basically nobodies at the time. A real ragtag group. They weren't famous, they weren't legends. Not yet, anyway. They were just in the wrong place at the right time. Or maybe the right place at the wrong time. The world would eventually come to know them as the Crystal Keepers.
And these are the names that went down in history. The Wind, the Oak, the Spear. These weren't their real names, of course. They were aliases they took on to protect themselves, because, as you can imagine, the Dark Lotus wasn't too happy about being exposed and sent assassins after them constantly.
But behind those legendary titles were real people. And they paid an unbelievable price. Damian Steele, Jet Zephyr, Isla Ren, Bok Finian. These are just some of the heroes who gave their lives to finally bring that war to an end. Only a handful, like the incredible Ravenna Solstice, actually survived to see the peace they fought so hard for.
But the legacy of the Crystal Keepers isn't just that they stopped the war. It's also about the massive secret they all agreed to create right after it ended.
You see, the full, detailed story of how they actually defeated the Dark Lotus, well, it's never been told. The survivors and the leaders of the kingdoms made a pact to deliberately keep the specifics vague. And this wasn't them just trying to move on. It was a very calculated, very strategic choice.
And the reason why is, honestly, it's chilling. They buried the truth to make sure no one could ever copy what the Dark Lotus did. They decided that the knowledge of how to manipulate the entire world on that scale was just too dangerous for anyone to have. So imagine you're living in that world. You've just survived 50 years of war, only to find out it was all a lie orchestrated by a shadow organization. You'd be desperate for something real, something honorable to believe in. And that desperation led to one of the biggest cultural shifts in history.
And the answer they found was Bushido. It was originally the unwritten code of the samurai, but it became the guiding light for a world that had lost its way. It was this powerful philosophy that filled that moral vacuum, putting things like honor and loyalty back at the center of society.
The whole code was built on these 7 core virtues: rectitude, or just doing the right thing; courage, obviously; benevolence, which is about mercy and kindness; then you have respect, honesty, honor, and finally, loyalty. These ideas became the new foundation for a society trying to rebuild itself from the ground up.
But here's the interesting thing. Not everyone adopted it the same way. The more martial societies, like the Crystal Kingdom and the Kingdom of Breeze, they went all in. They wove Bushido directly into their warrior culture. But the more philosophical Hightower Kingdom, they studied it, adapted it, and kind of merged it with their own ethical beliefs.
And that brings us to today. The war is over, the heroes are legends, a code of honor, and one form or another guides the kingdoms. But that secret, the one about the Dark Lotus, and more importantly, how they did what they did, it's still out there, buried. And it really makes you wonder, in a world like this, how long can a secret that powerful ever truly stay hidden?